At the company dinner for couples, I saw her. Sitting at the table with him. Laughing, tilting her face slightly to hear some disgusting confidence he whispered in her ear. And I, who arrived believing that this would be just another banal event, like so many that she herself said she hated, discovered at that moment the exact value I had in her life, none. I was not her husband. I was the disguise. I was the comfortable, convenient backdrop. A detail that she could easily forget while laughing her head off in front of the person who truly excited her. But what destroyed me was not the laughter. It was the look. The look she gave me when she saw me there, standing at the other table, like a mistake. There was no panic. There was no shame. There was only discomfort. As if I were interrupting an intimate moment for her, as if my presence were a delay, a burden she no longer wanted to carry. I got up from the table without saying a single word. I walked past the smiling colleagues who didn't know what was happening, and went over to her. Her lover remained seated, his fork poised, paralyzed, as if he were afraid of my reaction. She looked at me with wide eyes, and for a second, a brief second, I thought she might say something, might try to justify the unjustifiable. But she didn't. And I didn't say anything either. I just stared at her. And I left. The sound of my own footsteps hurt me as if each step was a different knife. I left the restaurant as if I was running away from a fire. But what was burning was inside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something. I wanted to disappear and never feel anything again. Because that was when everything fell apart. Because that was when I understood that I was never a choice. I was comfort. I was security. And no one wants security when they have fire in their eyes. The days that followed were surreal. I alternated between anger and emptiness. And when she came home late that night, pretending she hadn't seen me, I had already packed up every piece of me she no longer deserved. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of her. I just said, "You don't have to pretend anymore. I saw you." She tried to mumble something, but I went upstairs, closed the door, and didn't open it again. But betrayal is a poison that spreads slowly. It's not just the act. It's the aftermath. It's the way our entire life feels like a retroactive lie. The trips, the birthdays, the hugs on cold nights. Every kiss she gave me after being with him. Every "I love you" uttered by someone else's dirty mouth. Everything, absolutely everything, started to taste like ashes. And yet, it wasn't her who was on the floor. It was me. But time is cruel and merciful. It tears apart and then, with luck, rebuilds. I don't know exactly when, but at some point in that darkness, I stopped looking back. It wasn't a miracle, it was a succession of choices. I started running. I started eating better. I started going out. One day, I talked to someone. Another day, I laughed for real. Little by little, life started to pulse again. And then, without looking for it, I met someone. It wasn't a trophy, it wasn't revenge. It was peace. It was warmth without the fear of abandonment. It was the feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. That's when she appeared. Like a ghost that insists on haunting us when we finally find the light. She came back with her eyes downcast, but her voice desperate. She said she had made a mistake. That it was all a delusion. That her lover had abandoned her. That he only wanted to have fun. That she discovered too late that the one who was by her side in the most difficult moments was me. That she wanted to come back. That she wanted our home, our routine, our smell. She wanted our family back. But pain has memories. And mine still bled every time I heard her voice. I forgave her. But I didn't go back. Not because I was angry. But because there was nothing there anymore. Because that man she left sitting alone at the table, that man who left a restaurant broken, that man died that night. She cried. She begged. She said she was sorry, that she would do anything to make it right. But some cracks don't heal. And she discovered right there, standing before me, that what she had thrown away wasn't waiting to be rescued. It was alive. It was loved. It was loved by another woman. By a woman who chose me from the start. Who didn't need to lose to understand the value of having. That was when she saw the photo on the bookshelf. Me and my new partner, smiling, holding hands. And it wasn't a posed smile. It was a real smile. A smile of someone who knows they don't need to fear betrayal. And there, in the silence of the room, she understood. She understood what she had lost. And what she would never have again. But she still didn't know everything. She didn't know that while I was planning to run away with my lover, I was planning something completely different. Something that would change our entire lives. A life project. A dormant dream. A gesture of love that she would never know, because she chose to follow another direction. And now, that plan was being realized. But not with her. With another woman. A woman who, unlike her, had never cheated on me. And that's where the story really begins. Because what she lost wasn't just a husband. It was everything that would come after. The most beautiful part of our story. And that, now, will be written, without her. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize betrayal. All the stories you hear are fictional, but based on real situations, with the sole purpose of showing how cheating destroys lives, families, and trust. Prepare to immerse yourself in an intense narrative, where love, pain and regret intertwine in an unforgettable way. Now take a deep breath, and prepare to hear a shocking story. Lucas and Helena were the kind of couple that people watched in silence, with a mixture of admiration and slight envy. Not because of their ostentation, because they were never the type to show off anything. It was something in the way they looked at each other in the midst of their routine, in their subtle attention to detail, in the discreet touch on each other's backs during a family dinner, or in the way they smiled when they spoke at the same time. They had been together for over a decade, married for 8 years and had a 5-year-old son, Daniel, who had his father's sweetness in his clear eyes and his mother's intensity in his temperament. They had a stable life, living in a welcoming house in a family neighborhood, where the porch was surrounded by plants and the neighbors greeted them by name. Helena worked at a communications agency and Lucas, a civil engineer, had just been promoted to coordinator of a large residential project that made him arrive home always after sunset, but with the same ritual of leaving the car, releasing the seatbelt with relief and walking to the door with that satisfied tiredness of someone who feels in the right place. Helena was a woman of silent presence. Beautiful, without making an effort to be so. Her brown eyes were attentive, and there was something in the way she listened that made people talk more than they intended. She was analytical, efficient at work, sweet at home, but never submissive. She had a strong opinion, liked things organized, and Lucas was her ideal counterpart, lighter, more patient, the kind of person who laughs at delays, who gives long, unhurried hugs. The dynamic between them worked. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid. Like the houses Lucas built, the two of them had built their own home brick by brick, day after day, between tiredness and small victories. Daniel grew up in an environment full of affection. On Saturday mornings, Helena would make pancakes while the boy tried to help and Lucas would tend to the garden while listening to music on his headphones. Their routine, although ordinary, was full of small rituals that sustained that daily life with a sense of belonging. The two of them took turns between school commitments, friends' birthdays, visits to their parents and occasional weekend getaways for two when they could find someone they trusted to look after their son. They had a group of friends in common. They attended Helena's company events, where Lucas was always welcome, and they knew how to share space, time and responsibilities with a certain care that made everything seem simple. But it wasn't. It never is. Adult life, with all its silent demands, stretched like a heavy blanket over both of their shoulders. There was fatigue, of course. There were nights when they slept without touching each other, entire weeks of merely functional conversations, and an unspoken longing for the time when love was spontaneous. But they resisted. Because they knew that true love is not always about ardent passion. It is presence. It is a pact. And they had sealed one. They had plans to travel to Europe next summer, a trip they had been putting off for years because of Daniel's school, the budget, the weather. But this year, they told each other, it would be different. Lucas had already saved part of his 13th salary for this, and Helena had been researching small towns in the interior of France. They liked the countryside more than big cities. She wanted wine, he wanted deserted roads to drive aimlessly. Lucas was a frequent presence at Helena's company meetings. He was elegant in the right measure, effortlessly friendly, and knew how to get around even though he worked in a completely different area. It wasn't uncommon for Helena's colleagues to praise her politeness and calmness, which made her silently proud. In the last few months, however, he began to notice a slight change in her demeanor. Nothing alarming. Maybe it was just the stress of work. Helena had taken on important new accounts, was leading a new team, and often complained about endless meetings and pressure to achieve results. She would come home tired, often exhausted, and sometimes, when Lucas hugged her, it seemed to take her a little longer to hug him back. But he didn't question it. He preferred to believe it was a phase. And like all phases, it would pass. At night, beside her, he still remembered everything they had been through together. The savings they had saved to buy their first house, the sleepless nights with Daniel as a baby, the fear and joy when the pregnancy test came back positive, the hidden tears when they had lost their first child, before Daniel. There was history there. There was dedication, there was complicity. He believed in this with conviction, even on the days when she seemed distant or when he himself wondered if he still knew her as well as he had before. There was something about Helena that had always been a mystery, an inaccessible place inside her. And perhaps that had enchanted him from the beginning. Helena, on the other hand, was living a silent whirlwind. She was entering a phase in her life in which internal demands seemed higher than external ones. She often felt pressured to be everything at the same time, a present mother, a dedicated wife, a successful professional, a desirable woman. She woke up tired and often didn't recognize herself in the mirror. Her clothes didn't seem to fit as well as before, she spent less time in front of the mirror, and her alone time was always invaded by tasks and deadlines. Still, she looked at Lucas with tenderness. Even when she was irritated by his slowness, even when she thought he was too distant, he was her anchor. And she knew it. She knew how much he did for her. She just didn't know how to repay him. She felt indebted. Some nights, after putting Daniel to bed, she would go downstairs with a heavy heart, grab a glass of wine, and sit on the couch, in silence, just to feel alive. At those times, Lucas would sometimes try to get closer, start a conversation, kiss her on the neck, but she would gently dodge him, saying she was tired, and he respected that. There was, however, a chasm opening up between them. A subtle, almost imperceptible chasm, like a crack in glass that you only notice when the light hits it in a certain way. And no one there seemed willing to look too closely. Their closest friends noticed the difference in energy between them. Some said it was just normal wear and tear. Others, closer to Helena, noticed her lost look when the subject of marriage came up. But no one asked her directly. And she never said anything. She just smiled. And Lucas, as attentive as he was to the world around him, seemed blind to the small changes inside his home. Their marriage was, in everyone's eyes, a success. There were no public fights, no scandals, no awkward silences at dinners. There was order. There was structure. But what no one saw was what was hidden in the details. In the too much time spent on the phone. In the kisses on the cheek instead of on the lips. In the way each of them spent more time than necessary in the shower. Or in the exchange of glances that no longer existed. Lucas had plans. He had been keeping a good secret for months. Something he wanted to reveal at the end of the year, when things calmed down. A surprise for Helena, something big, designed to rekindle what he still believed was alive between them. Adoption. They had always dreamed of having more than one child, but after the loss, Helena didn't want to get pregnant anymore. And he respected that. But he kept his desire to himself. And now, he had found a way. He was already in advanced talks with a social worker. He had already discreetly visited the shelter. He wanted to give her the world. And to the child they had yet to meet, a complete home. He had been feeling lighter these past few days. More hopeful. He imagined the moment when he would tell her everything. He imagined the sparkle in her eyes, the tight hug, the rebirth. He imagined it, because love made him believe. And even though he had noticed her absences, the silences, the too fast messages on his cell phone, he believed that everything was temporary. That it was just the weight of adult life. That she was still there. That she still loved him. Helena, on the other hand, was living a conflict she couldn't name. She oscillated between deep gratitude for Lucas and a silent restlessness that spread like fog. Life seemed to be slipping through her fingers. And sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she felt that there was something inside her asking for more. But more for what? She didn't know. Or didn't want to know. And it was in this scenario of silent, everyday, tense and yet hopeful love that everything began to change. But no one noticed. Not yet. Because silence, sometimes, is the cruelest disguise. The following months were filled with a succession of silences disguised as normality. Lucas continued with his project and, when he got home, he divided the little time he had left between taking care of Daniel and constantly trying to get closer to Helena. She, in turn, immersed herself more and more in work, in her commitments, in the new colleagues who came and went like waves. There was always an excuse, a new delivery, a new idea to lead. She started arriving late, leaving early, forgetting simple details of everyday life, like the type of milk her son preferred or the day of the meeting with the teacher. Lucas noticed, but didn't demand it. He tried to make up for it. He believed that being a partner also meant understanding moments of pressure and being present without intruding. Helena, however, no longer seemed to notice these subtle presences. Her gaze was always elsewhere, even when her body was at the table, next to them. Daniel, with his typical childhood innocence, seemed to feel the mood with a keen sensitivity. He started asking more questions. Why doesn't mommy play anymore? Why is she always in a hurry? Why don't we all have dinner together like before? Lucas smiled, lied out of love, said it was just a difficult phase and that everything would be fine soon. But deep down, he was starting to realize that this new behavior was not temporary. It was a transformation. And the worst part, a transformation that he was not part of. Helena dressed differently. It wasn't a radical change, but there was a new care, a new perfume, a new way of doing her hair that no longer seemed designed for him. She started leaving her cell phone on silent, upside down, even at night. She said it was to rest her mind. And Lucas, wanting to believe her, didn't insist. What he didn't know was that Helena had crossed a line. Not in a planned way, not as part of a strategy to destroy what they had built. It happened the way choices that change everything happen, in the carelessness of a glance, in the comfort offered by someone at a time when the soul is fragile. She had met Marcos at a campaign presentation. He was one of the external consultants hired to review strategic proposals. He had a relaxed, observant, soft-spoken manner that contrasted with the hectic environment Helena was in. Over time, they began exchanging messages outside of work hours, nothing explicit at first, just affinities. A common taste in music, a comment on the current series, a criticism of a difficult client. The conversations progressed without her realizing how intimate they were becoming. She felt heard, interesting, alive. Things that, although Lucas had never stopped offering, she had failed to notice. The messages turned into quick video calls. Then, coffees at the end of the workday. And then, one day, Helena didn't come home straight away. She said she was staying for a team happy hour and arrived much later than usual, smelling of wine that Lucas didn't recognize and looking too distant to justify with tiredness. That night, he slept without undressing. She turned on her side, her back to him, like an insurmountable wall. Lucas stared at the ceiling for long minutes, trying to rationalize what he felt. Something was off. He couldn't deny it anymore. Doubt began to eat away at him silently. The following days brought more distance and little lies. Helena started wearing clothes he had never seen before, saying she had bought them a long time ago and that they had been stored away. Makeup, which had been neglected before, was back in her daily routine, even for virtual meetings. Lucas watched her with a mixture of bewilderment and sadness. He said nothing, but his soul was beginning to crumble. And then came the invitation to Helena's company dinner, an annual event to which he was always invited. This year, she hesitated before inviting him. She said it would be something smaller, more focused on the team. He insisted on going. She said it would be good to get out for a while, relax, be among different people. Helena, pressured, gave in. She said he could go, of course, but that maybe she was busy with her creative colleagues and wouldn't be able to spend much time with him. On the night of the event, Lucas dressed up more carefully than usual. He chose the shirt that Helena always complimented, fixed his hair, and put on his most striking perfume. There was something inside him that longed for a reunion. To see her in the environment where she now seemed so alive. He wanted to remind her of who they were. They arrived together, but Helena quickly walked away under the pretext of greeting her colleagues. Lucas stayed alone for a few minutes, observing the room. It was an elegant place, with round tables arranged with glasses lined up, low lighting, soft music. He recognized some faces, greeted others cordially. But he didn't see her. He walked through the aisles between tables, amidst indifferent glances, until, from afar, he saw her. Sitting. Laughing. With a man he didn't know. The scene froze him. She was laughing with her head thrown back slightly, as she did when she was truly enjoying herself. Her hand was on the table, too close to his. The two of them were isolated, as if the environment around them didn't touch them. Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He tried to rationalize. Maybe he was just a friend. A work partner. But something in him knew. Helena's gaze, as she looked at that man, was not one of friendship. It was contained desire, complicity, enchantment. An expression he hadn't seen on her face for a long time. He stepped back, returning to his table as if he were gasping for air. He sat down, but didn't stay. The lump in his throat was unbearable. He stood up, crossed the room with firm steps, and stopped in front of the table where Helena was sitting. The man looked at him with discomfort. Helena, upon seeing him, froze. For a second, the silence between them weighed more than any words. Lucas didn't say anything. He just looked at her. A look so deep that it tore everything inside her apart. She tried to smile, to say something, but he had already turned around. And left. As he stepped outside, he felt the cold night air cut his skin like razors. He walked to the car slowly, but his heart was racing. He didn't cry. Not yet. There was a state of numbness. Of disbelief. As if that scene wasn't his life. As if he was watching a movie. But it was real. The woman he had shared years of intimacy with, who wore the ring he had bought with such pride on her finger, who slept next to him every night, was there, flirting with another man in public. As if he didn't exist. As if he had never existed. That night, Lucas didn't go home. He drove aimlessly, parked somewhere in the city and stood there, staring into space. Thinking about everything. About Daniel, who slept without knowing that the family he knew had broken up in silence. He thought about the plans he was making. About what he was keeping secret to surprise Helena. And about how ridiculous it all seemed now. He felt small. Empty. Betrayed in a way that words couldn't describe. The next day brought more silence. Helena didn't look for him. Nor did he look for her. They simply returned to their routine, as if they lived in parallel realities. Daniel, more sensitive than ever, noticed the distance, but couldn't name it. Lucas, now, saw everything with new eyes. Every gesture of Helena's seemed loaded with absences. Every word carried the weight of an unconfessed lie. And, even without explicit proof, he knew. He felt it in her body, in her smell, in the touch that no longer came. But it wasn't the end yet. There was still something he didn't know. A detail hidden amidst the pain. Something that wasn't just linked to betrayal. Something that Helena carried in silence. A secret that, when revealed, would change everything forever. On a gray Sunday afternoon, Helena appeared at the door without warning, her face without makeup, her eyes sunken and her expression devastated. She carried with her a fragility that Lucas had never seen before. She was not the same woman who had previously shared the couch with him in silence, nor the confident professional of the events. She was an emptied version of herself, with the crooked posture of someone who had been pushed to the bottom of an abyss and didn't know how to climb back out. Lucas was sitting in the backyard, watching Daniel play from a distance, as he had done in the last few days, trying to find in his son the only kind of love that still seemed whole. When he saw her, he remained silent. There was no longer any surprise. There was only the waiting for the inevitable. Helena walked slowly, as if her steps were too heavy. As she approached, she spoke softly, in a broken voice, "Can we talk?" Lucas looked up with a cutting calm and just nodded. They went inside the house, and the silence between them was so thick that it seemed to stick to the walls. She sat on the couch with her hands clasped together, took a deep breath, and said, "He broke up with me." Lucas didn't move. Not a single muscle. He just kept his eyes fixed on her, as if hearing confirmation of something he already knew. He said he didn't want any more complications. That it was time to move on with his life. He never really promised anything. I created expectations where I shouldn't have. Her voice broke between the words. I was stupid, Lucas. Selfish, ungrateful, blind. I got involved in a moment of weakness thinking it was something that would complete me. But what I did was destroy everything that really mattered. I didn't come here to apologize. I know words don't solve anything. I just needed you to know what happened. And to forgive me. Even if you never want to look at my face again. Lucas stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there, with his back to her, for several seconds. Then he spoke, with a calmness that seemed rehearsed, but it wasn't. You betrayed me out of need. And now you're coming back out of abandonment. That's not love, Helena. That's desperation. She cried silently, as if she was already expecting every word that would come. But Lucas didn't finish. He slowly turned around and sat in front of her, looking into her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he spoke clearly. What you destroyed wasn't just what we had. It was what we were still going to build. Do you know what I was preparing for the two of us? She shook her head, denying it, her eyes still full. During the last few months, while you were lost in this escape, I was in contact with a social worker. We had started the adoption process. I wanted to give Daniel a brother. You, a new chance to love. Us, a new cycle. I had already made visits, interviews, delivered documents. I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you. Because I believed that we still had a future. And now, that future will happen. But not with you. Helena's eyes widened. The pain in her expression was more acute than any previous reaction. Were you going to adopt a child? The question came out as a whisper. Lucas nodded. No, I wasn't. I am. The social worker has already approved our profile. I just had to change my marital status to single parent. Helena burst into tears, this time unable to contain herself. She bent over her knees, smothering her face in her hands, as if she wanted to disappear inside her own body. I didn't know, Lucas. God, I had no idea. I never imagined, and she sobbed uncontrollably. Lucas watched her without expression, as if he had finally understood the extent of what he had lost, and what he had gained from the loss. This child will have a home. He will have love. He will have stability. He will grow up next to Daniel. And next to me. And maybe, with luck, next to someone who is willing to build all of this with me. Without running away. Without lying. Without looking outside for what he promised to take care of here inside. What followed were long minutes in which all that could be heard was Helena's crying. Lucas stood up once more, went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, came back and placed it in front of her. Then he sat down again, maintaining the same firm posture. I don't hate you, Helena. But I don't love you anymore either. What I felt for you died at that dinner. And now that you told me he left you, I understand one thing, you didn't come back for me. You came back for yourself. Because you felt alone. Because he didn't choose you. And that's not enough to rebuild anything. She lifted her swollen face, her eyes completely red. What if I regret it, Lucas? What if I want to start over from scratch? What if I'm willing to fight? I know I don't deserve it. But I still want our family. I still love you. He interrupted her with a delicate gesture of his hand. You love the idea of me. You love what you lost. But you don't love me. Because those who love don't destroy like that. And even if you did. I'm not the same man anymore. And you're no longer the woman I loved. The sound of the door opening outside interrupted the moment. Daniel ran into the room, with a toy car in his hand, smiling, oblivious to everything. When he saw his parents, he stopped. He noticed his mother crying, his father's hard gaze. He approached slowly. Mommy, are you sad? Helena tried to force a smile, but couldn't. She knelt down and hugged him tightly. It's okay, my love. Mommy just came to visit you. Lucas approached and ran his hand through the boy's hair. Shall we play outside again, son? The sun is nice. Daniel looked at the two of them, hesitated, then nodded shyly. Helena watched them leave and stayed there for a few more seconds, kneeling on the rug, alone, in the center of the room that had once been the heart of the home she had chosen to abandon. That night, as she drove back to the apartment she now rented alone, Helena felt the real emptiness that had once been just a fear. Now it was concrete. There was no more chance. There was no more waiting. Just the silence of the choices made and the cruel echo of lost opportunities. Everything she had destroyed had taken on new forms. Forms that no longer included her. And there, as the streetlight streaked across the car window, she understood that forgiveness might even be possible, but going back was no longer an option. Because while she was trying to recover what she had thrown away, Lucas had already allowed himself to be happy again. In a different way. In a different time. And alongside someone who was yet to come. Days had passed since that conversation in which Helena faced the most brutal reality of her adult life, the love that had ceased to exist not for lack of feeling, but for exhaustion. The silence that followed that afternoon was crueler than any scream. She didn't try to return. Not out of pride, but because she understood that there was no more room for trying. Lucas had closed a door that had no handle on the outside, and she knew, even without accepting it, that some choices, when made, burn the bridge completely. She returned to her small apartment, with white walls and rented furniture, where everything sounded hollow. She began working from home more often, avoided the agency's hallways, and changed sidewalks if she saw old colleagues. The man for whom she had risked her family had become nothing more than an embarrassing memory. There had been no phone call, no message, nor any sign of remorse on his part. He simply disappeared, like someone leaving a restaurant in the middle of dessert and never coming back. Lucas, on the other hand, was immersed in a new routine. The final interview with the social worker had been positive, and within a few weeks he received the phone call: there was a child available for immediate adoption. A 3-year-old girl with intense eyes and a delicate name, Lara. The connection was immediate. He saw her for the first time in a playroom, sitting in the corner with a teddy bear with almost no fur. When she looked at him, there was no doubt. It wasn't compassion, it wasn't neediness, it was a bond. The kind of thing that can't be explained. Daniel went with him to a few meetings. The two got along so well that the team responsible for the process was moved. It was as if this child had been waited for all his life and had only now found the right path. In less than 2 months, Lucas signed the final documents. Now he was the father of 2 children. A new family was being born, built on the ruins of an old one. But without resentment. Only with the firmness of someone who understands that life goes on, and can flourish in unexpected terrain. During this process, she met Carolina. A volunteer teacher at the shelter where Lara was staying. She was different from Helena in every way, including her gaze. There was no restlessness, no rush, no thirst for more. Carolina was a calm presence, with a discreet smile and thoughtful speech. She had lived in an abusive marriage years before and had slowly rebuilt her life. When they met, it was through practical matters, reports, appointments. But little by little, something grew out of it. First a coffee, then a conversation about books, then an exchange of messages. Carolina met Daniel, was charmed by his sweetness. She met Lara and began to visit the house discreetly. Lucas did not rush anything. He was at a point in his life when he no longer had room for illusions. He wanted lightness, reciprocity and, above all, truth. And Carolina brought all of this silently, without promising anything other than a sincere presence. While Lucas was moving forward with his new life, Helena lost herself in revisits. She started looking at old photos, videos of birthdays, and saved letters that she didn't even remember writing. She discovered records of a time when she smiled naturally. She reread a card that Lucas had left on her bed on their wedding anniversary, written with such special tenderness that it made her cry for hours. At first, she cried out of regret. Then, out of helplessness. And finally, out of emptiness. She didn't just miss Lucas. She missed the woman she was when she was with him. And that, she knew, would never come back. She tried to get closer to Daniel, but the boy, although sweet, was now selective. He preferred to spend the weekend with his father. He spoke excitedly about Lara, and called Carolina by her name naturally, as if she had always been part of the landscape of the house. And that tore Helena apart inside. One day, when she picked up Daniel for lunch, she was surprised. The boy ran up to her, hugged her, and said excitedly, "Mommy, Lara called me brother today." Helena smiled, but her stomach turned. It wasn't jealousy. It was an abrupt realization that her place was being taken, even if by someone who was not to blame at all. Later, when Daniel was dozing in the back seat of the car, she parked near the park where they used to go on Sundays and cried. But it was no longer a cry of regret. It was mourning. Mourning for a life that was no longer hers, for choices that could not be undone, for a love that, because it was so great, could not survive neglect. The following week, a mutual friend sent her a photo. It was from a get-together at the shelter. In it, Lucas appeared with Lara on his lap, Carolina by his side, Daniel wearing a colorful paper hat. Everyone was laughing. It was a simple image, but absolutely symbolic. There was a new core there. A reconstruction that didn't ask for permission, that didn't look back. Helena stared at the image. She spent minutes analyzing the faces, the body language, the environment. She realized that Lucas had changed. There was a sparkle in his eyes that she hadn't seen in years. A kind of light that comes from peace, not passion. She knew, that man would never come back. A short time later, late in the afternoon, Helena decided she needed to talk to him again. Not to ask for anything, not to try to reverse what was already consolidated, but to shut down inside her what was still pulsating like noise. She called. He answered with a neutral, cordial, but distant voice. She asked them to meet. Lucas hesitated. Carolina was at home, Lara was sleeping. But he understood that she needed to listen. They arranged to meet at the park, where they knew they could talk in peace. Helena arrived first. She was visibly different. Less vanity, less defensive posture, more silence. When Lucas arrived, she didn't smile. She just nodded. They sat on the wooden bench that had once sheltered so many plans and, for a long minute, all they could hear was the sound of children playing in the distance. She began slowly, bluntly. "I wanted to thank you." He frowned slightly. She continued. "For being everything I couldn't appreciate at the time. For loving me in a way that I now understand was rare. And for raising our son with dignity even after everything." I saw the picture. "You look beautiful." Lucas nodded. "I don't do anything for greatness. I just try to be whole, even after being broken." She smiled sadly. "You've always been whole. I just didn't know how to be whole with you." There was a pause. "I wanted you to know that even if it takes years, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to forgive myself." Lucas took a deep breath, then stood up. "The pain taught you. And that's something. But it doesn't come back. And that's okay. Because you'll find something that makes sense. You just need to be honest with yourself, for once." She nodded. She didn't try to hold on, she didn't ask for a hug, she didn't ask for a second chance. She just watched him walk towards the park exit. As he walked away, she felt a weight lift from her chest. It was still pain, but there was a trace of liberation. It wasn't about getting it back anymore. It was about understanding, accepting, and moving on with the scar. And in that moment, as the sun slowly set behind the trees, Helena understood that sometimes, losing is all that's left to teach us the value of not wasting it. Lucas, as he got into the car, looked back just once. He saw Helena sitting there, her eyes lost in the orange sky. He thought about everything they had lived through, everything they could have lived through, and then he started the car. There was a girl waiting for him at home, a woman with serene eyes preparing dinner, and a boy with questions ready about dinosaurs. Life went on. And now, finally, it was a living life. Real. Serene. And there was no more room for ghosts. The last conversation in the park did not end their feelings, but it sealed their paths. From that moment on, each person's choices solidified into different and irreversible realities. Helena returned to her life with the weight of what she now understood as definitive. There were no more bridges, no shortcuts, no veiled hope. All that was left was to rebuild herself on her own. She began regular therapy, stopped going to the places she used to go with Lucas, and accepted that some losses are so great that they cannot be overcome, they are only integrated into the body like one less limb. She began to live with the silence of the weekends that did not belong to her, because Daniel preferred to be with his father and sister, and as much as it hurt, she no longer fought against it. She began to cook for herself, to read more often, to walk slowly. But no matter how hard she tried to fill the void, there was one moment of the day that remained unbearable: sunset. That time when the lights go out in the city and the house begins to take on shadows. In that interval, he felt less like a person and more like a memory. A memory of everything he let slip through his fingers. Lucas, on the other hand, was entering a phase in which daily life no longer required strength to continue, but dedication to live. Lara adapted with a sensitivity that moved him every day. She had a quiet way of observing everything, but when she laughed, she filled the house with a sound that seemed to break any trace of old pain. Daniel was increasingly protective, calling her sister with the naturalness of someone who had never known any other form of affection. Carolina approached with sure steps. She never invaded, never pressured. And this made Lucas trust her with a speed that, before, would have seemed impossible. She did not try to cure him, she simply allowed herself to be present. And in this presence, he learned that love does not need to come like a storm to be true. It can come like a breeze. And still be immense. The practical changes also intensified. Lucas put the house up for sale. Not because he wanted to get rid of the past, but because he wanted to start over with freedom. Together they looked for a new place. An airy 2-story house with a large backyard for the children to play in. Carolina loved to plant, and he liked the idea of having a vegetable garden. The moving boxes were packed little by little, calmly, almost like a farewell ritual. Each packed object brought a fragment of what was left. But, contrary to what he feared, there was no sadness. There was a new serenity in realizing that the past, however painful it was, no longer needed to be the center. It could just be part of the story. Helena found out about the move from Daniel. The excited boy told her about the new room, about the plans for the vegetable patch, about the swing that Lucas had promised to install. Helena listened to everything with a forced smile. She wasn't angry. She felt a mix of melancholy and pride. As strange as it was, she admired the man Lucas had become. And she hated herself for not having seen all of this while there was still time. She tried to focus on her own path. She started participating in support groups for mothers in shared custody situations. She heard other stories, she heard pain that was similar to hers. There, she found a network. People who didn't judge her, who knew what it was like to lose the center of one's life due to bad choices. She started to write. Simple but intense texts. Fictional stories of losses and new beginnings. I posted anonymously on a small blog. And, to her surprise, readers started to appear. People who cried with her words, who felt understood. It was a way of turning pain into a bridge, and that, for the first time in a long time, made her feel useful. One night, while she was reviewing one of these texts, she received a call from an unknown number. She answered without thinking. It was Carolina. Her voice was firm, but not hostile. She asked to talk in person. Helena, surprised, hesitated for a moment, but accepted. They arranged to meet in a discreet coffee shop. The meeting was tense at first. Carolina didn't come with anger or moralizing. She said clearly that she wasn't looking for confrontation, but needed to understand if there was anything unresolved, if there were emotional risks that could affect the children. Helena swallowed hard. She hadn't expected that. But she understood. She apologized. Not for the betrayal itself, that wasn't the place, but for any remnants of suffering that were still unresolved. She said she had no intention of interfering in Lucas's new life. That she accepted her position. That what she felt now was something else, not a desire to get back, but gratitude for having survived her own fall. Carolina listened, analyzed each word calmly, and, in the end, extended her hand. That's great to hear. Because all we want now is peace. And it would be great to be able to count on you in this new cycle. Daniel needs everyone around, but no one can be whole if the past still hurts. Helena held the gesture firmly. She nodded in agreement and felt, at that moment, something inside her finally give in. As he left the cafe, he watched the sky getting darker and felt that the sunset hurt less. He called his therapist, scheduled a new session, and on the way home, he bought paint to paint the living room wall. A light, warm color. A symbolic change, perhaps, but it was what he could do. At the same time, Lucas and Carolina were preparing Daniel's birthday party. The first one where Lara would be an official part of the family. They planned everything carefully, from the theme to the menu. Carolina suggested something simple, in the backyard, with food they had made themselves. Lucas agreed. The party didn't have to be big. It had to be honest. Helena would be invited. Not out of obligation, but out of right. She was the mother. And now, there was a new silent pact between them. A pact of respect. The dilemma that began to emerge for Helena was not about returning, but about how to remain present without interfering, how to love from a distance something that had once been her entire world. There was no manual for this. But, when she looked at her son, she understood that her pain could not override his happiness. And this required a kind of maturity that only extreme loss teaches. She began to reorganize her own schedule to respect the schedules of the new home. She avoided untimely calls, unnecessary questions, and veiled comparisons. She stopped playing the victim. And little by little, she began to build a new identity. Not that of a betrayed wife. Nor that of a repentant woman. But that of someone who, after breaking up, decided to be different. Not better. Just more truthful. The birthday arrived with clear skies and gentle warmth. The backyard was decorated with colorful ribbons, balloons, and a table handmade by Lucas and Daniel, covered in sweets and souvenirs. Laura ran across the lawn in a flowery dress, Daniel played with his school friends, and Carolina coordinated everything with ease. When Helena arrived, there was a brief silence. But soon, Daniel ran to her, hugged her tightly, and pulled her by the hand. "Mommy, come see the cake." She followed. She greeted Lucas with a discreet smile, exchanged a firm look with Carolina, and then spent the afternoon among chairs, smiles, and silent memories. She was no longer part of the core. But she was still a root. And in that space, there was room for truth, as long as it no longer tried to be what it once was. When the party was over, she helped collect some things. Carolina, in an unexpected gesture, offered her a piece of pie to take home. Lucas thanked her for coming with a handshake. Daniel kissed her and ran to show Laura the gifts. As she left through the gate, Helena looked back. There was no resentment. There was no regret. Only the certainty that this was the closest thing to peace he would ever find. And life went on. With new rituals, new pains, new constructions. Each one with their own scar, but everyone finally moving forward. Because in the end, the betrayal was not just a breakup. It was the beginning of something no one expected. A different path. More difficult, yes. But more true. And in that new scenario, everyone was where they should be. Even if it wasn't exactly where they had dreamed one day. A few weeks after Daniel's party, life seemed to have settled into a new rhythm. The wounds didn't magically heal, but they had adapted to the body, living like scars that no longer hurt as much as before. Lucas divided his time between work, taking care of the children, and spending time with Carolina, who was increasingly gaining space in his routine in an organic and calm way. She wasn't taking Helena's place, because that place no longer existed. She was occupying the space that she herself had created, with patience, empathy, and constant presence. Little by little, the atmosphere in the house was filled with a new feeling, almost unknown to Lucas, emotional stability. Not the kind that comes from the absence of problems, but from the certainty that what one experiences is true and respected. Carolina knew how to listen without trying to fix, she knew how to speak without hurting, she knew how to keep quiet without pushing away. She was a woman marked by deep pain, but transformed into maturity. Helena continued her silent process of transformation. The blog grew more than she expected. She received messages from women from all over the world, sharing stories of loss, guilt and rebuilding. This gave her a new purpose. For the first time in years, she felt like she was contributing to something bigger than herself. She started being invited to conversation circles, support groups, live broadcasts and even literary events. The exposure, which had previously made her uncomfortable, was now received with humility. She never said that the texts were about her, but each line contained pieces of what she had experienced. That was enough to make it real. One day, after an event, a woman approached her and held her hand tightly. She said, with a choked voice, that her text about loss and starting over had kept her from giving up on her own life. Helena cried. There, In that moment, she understood that not all pain is wasted. Some become bridges. And she had built one. But even with the progress, there was one issue she still couldn't face clearly: Lucas's new bond with Carolina. Knowing about the existence of another woman was one thing. Seeing this woman become a constant figure in her son's life was something else entirely. Not out of jealousy, not out of a desire to regain what she had lost, but because she was dealing with the feeling of being replaced. She knew that this wasn't rational, but it was inevitable. She felt a pang in her chest every time Daniel told her about something that Carolina said, Carolina did, Carolina took. And that forced her to face the harshest reflection in the mirror: she had stopped being an emotional reference because of the other woman's merit, not because she was forced to. And that hurt. One morning, when she dropped Daniel off at school, the boy asked if she could go to the science project presentation the following week. Helena agreed, of course, and he replied excitedly that everyone would be there: Daddy, Carolina, Laura, and the teacher he liked. Helena smiled, but something trembled inside. The naturalness with which he mentioned Carolina among his family members stirred in her a mixture of acceptance and loss. On the day of the presentation, she arrived a little early. She chose a discreet place in the back of the room, observing the other families. When Lucas entered with the three of them, she saw them from afar. Daniel jumping around them, Laura holding Carolina's hand, Lucas carrying a backpack on his back and some papers. They looked like a picture in an album. When they sat down, Daniel looked around and, upon seeing her, ran to her with a sparkle in his eyes. "Mommy, you came." She hugged him tightly, and he immediately pulled her to show her the project poster. Carolina's eyes met hers for a brief moment. Just a nod. Lucas did the same. Calm cordiality. After the presentation, there was a collective snack. Helena stayed with Daniel for a while, then discreetly moved away to make room. As she was leaving, she heard someone call her name. It was Carolina. She called her for a quick chat in the courtyard. "I know these meetings are strange. But I wanted to thank you. For the way you're dealing with everything." Helena took a deep breath before answering. "It's not easy. But I think the least I can do is not make what's already delicate worse." Carolina nodded. "You're present. And that's much more than most mothers who distance themselves do. Daniel feels it. He speaks of you fondly. But now, he also speaks of me. And I want you to know that I will never try to take your place. I just want to be part of what he builds from now on. In a respectful way." Helena nodded, her eyes moist. "I know. And despite everything, I thank you. Because, as much as it hurts, seeing my son smile with you is better than seeing him confused and hurt. You are taking care of the most precious part of my life. And if he loves you, then it's because you deserve it." The moment between them was brief, but it sealed something that neither of them could name. Perhaps it was a pact of humanity. An unspoken agreement that pain could coexist with maturity. Helena returned home feeling that, little by little, something in her chest was stopping bleeding. And Lucas, who watched the scene from afar, knew that that day represented a turning point. It was proof that everything he had built with effort, despite the chaotic past, was finally being built on solid foundations. That same week, he decided to take the children to the beach. He invited Carolina. It was just a regular weekend, with no special dates. He just wanted to take a breather from the routine. They rented a small house near the sea, modest but comfortable. Daniel spent the whole drive singing in the car. Laura slept with her chin resting on her chest. Carolina laughed at Lucas's childhood stories. It was all so different from the reality he had lived for years, that sometimes he found it hard to believe that it was really his. When they arrived, the children ran to the sand. It was late afternoon. The golden sunlight fell on their faces as if blessing this new chapter. Lucas looked at Carolina, who was looking at him with a light smile. He approached her and kissed her slowly. It was a silent kiss, full of meaning. It was the recognition that, after the chaos, life could still flourish. The following Monday, when she dropped Daniel off at school, Helena handed him a small letter. She asked him to give it to his father. It was simple. A white envelope with delicate handwriting. Lucas read it at night, after the children were asleep. Carolina was in the kitchen, making tea. The letter said, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to redeem myself for the way I destroyed everything, but seeing you rebuilt comforts me more than I can explain. May you be happy, Lucas. May you find in Carolina everything that I wasn't able to give you. Thank you for being the father Daniel needed, even when I was an absent mother. Thank you for continuing without hating me. Today, more than anything, I'm rooting for you." Lucas folded the paper carefully. He was silent for a few minutes. There was no anger. There was no hurt. Just the confirmation that everything had finally found its place. Meanwhile, Helena continued to write. Her blog gained more readers every week. She received invitations to write columns for opinion portals. She was negotiating with a publisher to launch her first book. And in the midst of all this, she met someone. A widowed university professor who had read her texts and wrote her a touching email. They started talking. Nothing romantic. Just an exchange of views. But there was fertile ground there. For the first time, she felt that she could get to know someone without carrying the desire to fill the gaps of the other. She was learning to be whole before being two. And that changed everything. Time passed. And life settled down. Helena, Lucas, Carolina, Daniel and Lara followed their stories in different directions, but connected by something greater, the understanding that some pains are teachers. And that when one chooses not to run away from them, it is possible to emerge truer, stronger and, above all, freer. There was still a lot to be experienced. But now, everyone was walking with their feet firmly in the present, without getting lost in what could no longer be changed. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the greatest sign that love, even when it leaves something behind. A new ground. A possible future. A new chance to be whole. A year has passed since the last exchange of glances between Helena and Lucas at that school event. An entire year in which scars became part of the skin and the love, once broken, gave way to something deeper, the understanding that certain stories were not meant to continue, but to teach. Their paths remained parallel and respectfully distant. Helena finished the book she began writing in silence, and when she launched it, she realized she had become a different woman. Not a new woman, as many like to say, but someone who had finally learned to look at her own flaws without despair, to sit with the pain without looking for external culprits. The book was called No Way Back, and in the first few weeks, it became a success among readers who saw in her words a painful and, at the same time, liberating mirror. In one of her interviews, someone asked if the work was autobiographical. She smiled, took a deep breath and answered, "Every story written with truth is autobiographical on some level." And that was it. The subtext said it all. Lucas, on the other hand, was becoming more established each day in the new place he called home. The house, now filled with drawings on the walls, laughter coming from the backyard and the constant smell of cake baking on Sundays, was the perfect portrait of a life rebuilt with care. Lara grew up with a sparkle in her eyes and confidence in her words. Daniel, more mature, became the kind of brother who protects and inspires. Carolina, present at every stage, was a foundation and shelter. She never needed to prove anything, because her essence spoke for her. Lucas rediscovered himself as a man, as a father and as a partner. There was no formal marriage proposal, there was no ring, there was no spectacle. There was a look in the middle of a rainy night, where she, without makeup, with her hair tied up in a mess, placed a blanket over him while he dozed on the couch. When he opened his eyes and whispered, "Are you staying forever?" she simply replied, "I already am." And that was the most sincere commitment of their lives. However, life's shocks don't choose a time to happen. And it was on an ordinary morning that everything changed. Lucas received a phone call from school. Daniel had felt sick in class, and there was no one to pick him up. He and Carolina were in a meeting about Lara's adjustment to school. He ran there, distressed, but when he arrived, he found Daniel well, with his vital signs back to normal. The shock was greater than the problem. On the way home, the boy was silent. Something was bothering him. Lucas asked if everything was okay, and after a few seconds, he answered, "Today, Mom didn't come to see me when I felt sick. She said she had a very important interview. But she didn't even call me afterward." Lucas just listened. He didn't judge. He just kept it to himself. Later, he tried to call Helena. It went to voicemail. The next day, he called again. Nothing. A week went by without an answer. Until he received a call from her mother. Helena had been in a car accident on the way to a lecture in another city. She was alive, but with multiple fractures, hospitalized in recovery. Alone. Lucas, even though he didn't have to, went to visit her. He arrived at the hospital and found her unconscious, with a pale face and her body immobilized by machines. Beside her, a copy of his own book, with pages marked with notes. He sat down next to her. He didn't say anything. He just stayed there. A nurse passed by and recognized him. "She talks a lot about you. She says you're still the best man she's ever met. That you messed up. But that you learned." Lucas didn't answer. He just looked at Helena for a few seconds and, before leaving, he left a note on the nightstand, "You survived. Now start over. For real. For you." And he left. He never came back. Not out of coldness. But because he knew that his presence could be mistaken for new hope, and he didn't want to lie with gestures what his words had already contained. Helen recovered. Slowly. But she recovered. And with her body marked by the scars from the accident, she began to give lectures with a different tone. No longer that of a woman who survived betrayal. But of a woman who survived herself. She publicly admitted her mistakes. She fearlessly exposed the wrong choices she made. And she became a firm voice on emotional self-responsibility. She never tried to get back together with Lucas, but she maintained a healthy bond with her son. She began to see him on the weekends, and now, yes, her visits were eagerly awaited by Daniel. She became a role model again. Not because she tried to redeem herself, but because she had truly changed. Carolina, on the other hand, continued to be the link that united them. One night, after putting the children to bed, she sat next to Lucas in the backyard. He looked at her, as if carrying something tight on his chest, and said, "Do you think I'll ever stop feeling guilty for having moved on?" She smiled tenderly. Feeling guilty is not a sign that you made a mistake. It's a sign that you care. But don't confuse compassion with debt. You don't owe anything to the past. You only owe truth to the present. And that's what you've given me. Lucas breathed a sigh of relief. That was it. He had found a woman who understood the shadows without trying to illuminate them all the time. A woman who knew how to live with what could not be changed. And for that reason, she was the only one with whom he could share what was yet to come. And what was to come would be simpler than it seemed. A new routine. A life without major upheavals. But with daily choices to be there. Helena, now recognized as an author, began a psychology course. She wanted to understand more about the pain she knew so well. Lucas and Carolina opened a social project to help abandoned children. Daniel and Lara grew up as inseparable siblings. And the betrayal, which once seemed to be the center of everything, became just a chapter. A painful chapter, yes, but necessary for everyone to become what they became. Because in the end, betrayal didn't just destroy a relationship. It destroyed the illusion. And it was from this rubble that something purer was born. More honest. More real. Helena learned that regret doesn't fix things, but it teaches. Lucas understood that forgiving isn't going back, it's moving on without carrying the burden of the other person. Carolina showed that loving someone who has been hurt requires wisdom, not haste. And Daniel and Lara grew up with the rare luck of seeing that love can change shape and still remain love. Comment below what you thought of this story and which character touched you the most. Your opinion is very important. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive other stories as impactful as this one. This story clearly and profoundly shows how betrayal has the power to devastate homes, destroy affections, and break bonds that took years to build. It is a scar that does not disappear. We just learn to live with it. May this narrative serve as a reminder that love demands respect, and that choices made in the shadows exact their price in the light. And remember, this channel does not support and never romanticizes betrayal. Our stories are fiction with a purpose, to show how loyalty is fragile but essential. Until next time.